Dev, welcome back.
You too, man.
It's good to be back. We are unwinding the headlines once again. I think we're doing 2 to 3 of these shows a quarter now.
Yeah.
So love that. Love being in-house as often as possible. So let's start with the latest from last week. Merit Medical pays Endogastric Solutions $105 million for their GERD treatment. So, I worked in the GI space for many years, very familiar with Endogastric Solutions when they first came to market. Same with Apollo Endoscopy, which was recently purchased by Boston Scientific. They are in a good cash position, Merit Medical. Last year at this time, they paid $100 million for a portfolio of dialysis catheter products from AngioDynamics, and then spent another $32.5 million for a device from Bluegrass Vascular Technology. So they're continuing their buying spree, if you will. So $105 million for GERD treatment, and GERD affects millions of Americans, right?
Yep.
Western civilization diet, acid reflux. What are your options? Maintain the symptom relief with Rolaids and
Tums and
Prilosec and all that, or you go and get a procedure, the TIF procedure.
Yeah.
And it takes care of all that for you. So they've done very well marketing this product and building programs throughout the United States. And now it's part of Merit Medical, which honestly makes a lot of sense because Merit's selling esophageal stents, airway stents, all which is impacted by the disease state of GERD. So it's good to see these transactions continuing to happen. And speaking of Boston Scientific, I feel like every time we do a show, they're mentioned because they're on a buying spree. They purchased Silk Road Medical.
Really interesting.
$1.3 billion, I'm rounding up, I think it was $1.26 billion, for their TCAR procedure, which is an alternative to an open procedure for the carotid artery, where they stent the area. So I'm intimately familiar with the procedure. My dad had to get either carotid surgery, which I think your dad had.
Yep.
Yeah, and my stepdad had both sides.
Yep.
It was like 95% blocked here, 90% here. But my dad had some other comorbidities, so I needed a less invasive procedure for him.
Yeah.
Did the whole physician finder thing and found the local doc that could do it. So very familiar with the TCAR procedure. And speaking of, we are working with a company that has a product for carotid stenting. The company's Inspire MD, Israeli-based company, traded on the NASDAQ, and they are building out a U.S. headquarters.
Yeah.
So we'll be working with them on that build out.
Let me ask you this, because you mentioned Boston. Similar to J&J with all the acquisitions they've been making, and some of the clients that you've been working with have been tucked in under Boston.
Yeah.
What have you been seeing from an integration perspective? Are they keeping them as standalone business units, or is because they have verticals in that therapy area, are they tucking them in and fully integrating them?
So we talked about this a little bit on the last podcast. You'll see, J&J kept Abiomed separate.
Yep.
So we're seeing more of a trend of that. But the companies that have really good training, and Boston Scientific's known for their training, will tend to tuck it into the bag into an existing team.
Yep.
So we'll see if that happens with TCAR. It may or may not. A lot of talented people at Silk Road that have built that up over the last decade that probably want to stay doing what they're doing and be left alone.
Yeah.
That's how most people are.
Yep.
So we'll see what happens. The trend depends on the company. And I'd say traditionally Boston sort of tucks them in. They'll leave them alone for a little bit and then tuck them in eventually. Although I work a lot in the pain management space, and they purchased Relievant, and they've got the Intracept procedure. And so far that is still being looked at as Intracept.
Yeah.
So it's part of Boston Scientific, but it seems to be marketed on its own. So we'll see which way that goes.
Yeah.
And the point I was going to make earlier on Silk Road and Inspire MD, the client we're working with, is the technology for carotid stenting is evolving. And an interesting stat is 2/3 of these events, whether it's a stroke or TIA, happen post-procedure. So how do you prevent that? Do you look at something like a product like your company has where you put a drug on a stent?
Yeah.
Or do you create what they created was called a micronet at Inspire MD, where they basically weave small netting into the stent that prevents embolization, prevents the clots from going through, helps with restenosis issues. So very exciting times as we continue to build out these companies. A lot of international companies coming to the U.S. I'm working with Israel right now on a couple projects. Australia.
Yep.
I'm looking for a chairperson for a company based out of the U.K. that has a unique coating for urology catheters.
Oh,
so
cool.
it's exciting times.
So kind of piggybacking off of some of the things that you mentioned, as a firm, it seems like we're working with more and more startup-oriented that are putting twists on legacy products like catheters, stents, balloons.
Yep.
So one of them in particular just raised $87 million through a Series B. They make a proprietary polymer scaffolding that's fully bioabsorbable for peripheral artery disease.
Okay.
So the scaffold itself, or stent-like mechanism, has the polymer that's delivering the drug, and over time it is fully absorbable into the human body,
Okay.
and predictable for that matter. And what their technology does, it makes it more flexible, it's thinner, it's lighter weight, it's more durable. So it's a really interesting technology for peripheral artery disease, which as of right now, anywhere between 1 and 20 Americans over the age of 50. It's a $23 billion business currently, expected to be around 28 in 2030.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is coming from below the knee.
Yep.
And that company in particular, what's interesting, and we're starting to see this as well, especially in structural heart, and it's creeping into some of these more complex Class 3 PMA technologies, is you have your classic med tech investors like a Deerfield Management or a 415 Capital, but then even on their press release, they'll have a line that says, and a strategic investor.
Sure.
So that could be a strategic medical device OEM, that could be a strategic biotech, or a strategic pharma in their case, because they make a combination product.
Right.
So, and we talk so much about what these things mean to people in the market as they're looking for new jobs. So if I was somebody who, let's say, had a combination background, and I see a fundraising event with a company like this, I mean, that is a trigger right off the bat that you should say, okay, maybe this is something I should start paying attention to.
Yeah.
But the fact that they already have this early stage backing or eyes on them from a strategic to have that first right of refusal, you might not even need to go the full-scale commercial route. You might need to provide some really strong clinical data, maybe early stage commercial success to prove the concept of the technology, and then you're out.
That's right.
And similar to some of the companies that you mentioned, you can stay on board and continue to build it, or you can put on your resume, I was the manufacturing leader, the quality leader, led a company through a PMA, got them acquired, and then pivot where you want to go from there.
That's right. And we see a lot of people that take a company to exit as one of the first 10 employees, and they love it.
Yeah.
And they get the fever and the itch for the startup game, and that's all they want to do. So their desire to stay on board post-acquisition, maybe to continue to raise the baby that they had.
Yep.
But after that, they're ready to go have another baby.
And how valuable is that to some of the clients that we work with when we're sharing resumes with them and going through people's backgrounds? They're looking at a resume, they're saying, okay, if we're staying on the combination product, okay, Boston Scientific, catheters, TAVR, okay, cool. Then he or she went to this company, it was a small company first, and it got acquired. Oh, okay, great. This makes this person much more interesting because they've been through that dance, especially, if you're talking about things like quality and making it, adhere to all of the FDA requirements, but not so stringent that it halts growth and acceleration. So having that on your resume as a check mark in terms of got big company, learned process, infrastructure, how to do things the right way, got startup, learned how to run around with my hair on fire, but still was able to build out a process and help that company get acquired. Now you can determine, okay, do I like the big company because of maybe it's more reliable? I want to go back there. You're more valuable because you can do more with less and they can multiply you. Or you go to another startup and do the same thing all over again.
Agreed. And here's the cool thing. You insulate yourself from hearing the word no when you apply for opportunities in the future.
Yep.
And what I mean by that is a lot of times hiring managers will look at a piece of paper and they'll look for gaps.
Yep.
They won't look for necessarily what you've done. It's more so what you haven't done, right? So they get a lot of resumes. And so the process of elimination is what don't they have that we need them to have in this role?
Yep.
Where when we work with our clients, we say, what areas have they touched on where maybe they weren't the person, but they've had their hand in a little bit of everything, so they understand it at a cursory level, and they have the contacts needed and the resources for your startup.
Yep.
That's going to be much more valuable to you than, say, a run-of-the-mill ops and manufacturing person.
Correct.
Or a run-of-the-mill R&D person.
Yeah.
Because all they've done is that particular job at a large company in a very siloed fashion.
Exactly.
And you don't need that at
Yeah.
a startup. You need somebody who is nimble, or that person has really had to do a little bit of everything. If it touched their role in any way, they've had a part in it.
Yeah.
And so my advice to companies hiring people for these roles is don't look for what they don't have.
Mm-hmm.
Look at what they do have and how that can be a strength to your organization versus just hiring somebody who looks good on a piece of paper, right? I call it the cover your butt hire, right? Oh, well, looks good on paper,
Yeah.
checked all the boxes.
Yeah.
We all agreed. You almost want a risky hire sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's really not a risky hire. It's the best hire you've ever made because they have those additional skill sets.
Yeah. Especially, I mean, we're staying on this topic with some of those more legacy products like stents, balloons, catheters. I mean, there hasn't been any dramatic change to them over the last 50 years. I mean, there's been companies who have, and that's what makes, those companies really interesting, like a Petrero Medical, now it's called Accurant. I mean, they basically took a Foley catheter and put different sensing technology on it for ICU and CCU setting that's able to alert nurses on urinary output, interabdominal pressure. So, I mean, to be able to do that on something that's a legacy platform really bolsters your experience and your interest in the marketplace. And then you mentioned something else that I thought was really interesting is, if you're part of a large scale, or if you're a company that has, let's go back to this one, that has a drug-coated stent, right? It doesn't behoove you to take somebody out of a contract manufacturer that's making 50,000 stents a month, because that's not the volume or anywhere close to what you're going to be doing early stage preclinical.
Yeah, you need a process person.
You need a process person. So you might need to look at different avenues, like I mentioned, because some of those products, they haven't been iterated from a high-tech perspective in a very long time. So you might need to look at, okay, what are the chances of us finding a combination person at this level that's open, that's interested, that fits all of our compensation, in-office requirements, all of those things.
Inside a bullseye.
You start to narrow it, and it becomes a very thin needle to thread. So also thinking about, and we advise clients on this all the time, is what are the secondary and tertiary markets that we can go into that aren't direct hits to what you do, but are close enough, like you said, that those skills can overlap. Tight tolerance manufacturing, human tissue manufacturing, things that are very manual in nature where you need to be able to set up a process.
Sure. We found great people in automotive.
Exactly. Versus pushing a button, and I'm making it sound way easier than it is, but those heavy automated process lines, it's tough to take somebody from that type of volume where maybe they weren't the one who built out and started those lines from like a pilot manufacturing perspective. They came in way downstream and say, now we need you to go way upstream and build it. That's a big ask.
They don't have that skill set. And the question I asked to really crystallize if they have that experience is, tell me what you've built from scratch. Whether it's a process, a product, a service, what have you built from scratch? Because most people that get plugged into large companies don't have to do that. Now, we talked about this on some previous podcasts. You can sometimes reverse engineer that. So if you've been on board at a company for a while that's integrated a product that you've acquired and had to integrate that product into your manufacturing process, then maybe you have some of those skills. And you need to be able to articulate that. And that's our job to uncover it, but it's also their job to say, well, I don't have this, but I have this.
And sometimes those folks don't think to add that into their resume. When you talk to people at big companies, I mean, you've probably talked to people at Boston Sci who've been part of these integrations, and you'll put two and two together and you'll match the dates and you'll say, were you there when Sadra was incorporated into Boston Sci? And they'll say, yeah. Okay, what'd you do in that particular process? Oh, I led the integration. That's huge. You should be putting that on your resume and broadcasting that in some of these interviews.
It just happened this week. I was talking to a gentleman for a CCO opportunity for a confidential search that we'll talk about here at the end. But he was part of a laser company. And at the time when I was at Boston, we used that laser company for EHL lithotripsy for the spyglass technology. And Boston now owns that company.
Yep.
So it's just interesting how everybody's paths will cross eventually in this space, one way or another. And the more startups you work with, the more specialties, right? So my experience was, cardiology, endoscopy, urology, so a little bit of everything. You start to see these patterns. And our body is plumbing and it's electricity.
Yeah.
That's our body.
Yeah.
And so you want to keep the plumbing clear and you want to keep the electrical current going.
Yep.
And so it's not very complex when you break it down that way. And you have to start looking at what you said, what legacy products are out there, how can we make them better? And then suddenly ideas start to flourish about entire new product categories. You mentioned Proterro, which is Acuren now.
That was the name of the product.
Yeah, we know Joe Urban over there and done a good job with them. So, Outset Medical is another example. You have a lot of these great technologies that are out there that just make legacy products better or create a whole new category.
Yep. Blue ocean, if you will.
Blue Ocean, exactly. Just read that book for the second time. So, hey, I wanted to talk real quick about a couple things I'm working on just because I want to get your take.
Sure.
Because we haven't really chatted about it. So, in the last week, we've had 2 companies come to us for confidential CCO searches. One is in the brain health space, attacking Parkinson's. They've done $100 million in revenue, 55% of their business is in the US. Then we've got the other 45% in Europe and APAC. So that's going to be an exciting search to do. And then we've got another one for a smaller company that belongs to a conglomerate in the medical humidification space, gas analysis. So 2 totally different companies looking for the same type of leader, but different requirements, different needs.
Yep.
And then we're even working with a regenerative health company now, and I would call it the aesthetic space because they have 5 FDA-approved products. They get you in the door with all the skin stuff and treat people's skin issues, and then they go for the deeper issues. They can do stem cell homing now, where they use bioelectricity, and it creates a signal for the stem cell, so they know where to go. So if you walk in with a bum knee, they've got a brace with a bioelectric thing on it and stem cells now that can fix your knee.
Yeah. What's the name of that company?
Yeah, exactly. Another.
They make one for your back?
Right. Yeah. For migraine.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, all the different technologies that are out there, and they're all being clinically studied. This particular company has 7 locations now. They're going to scale to 124, and they want to go IPO in the next 18 months.
So is it like a franchise? You said 7 locations.
Yeah, so it'll be like a licensing and franchising opportunity, and they need a VP of franchising and licensing.
Okay.
So it's an exciting sort of adjunctive space to a lot of the common things we do today with a founder that has been in traditional med device, but has now went into this realm and is, really adapted to the fundraising atmosphere, has been at LSI and the other meetings. And then we've got a confidential search for a larger company, which we don't do a lot, in the women's health sector. So all of these roles allow you and I to not only show our subject matter expertise, right? We've talked about it before. The Mullings Group focuses on the 4 pillars, right? The market, the mission, the product, the team. And if I share with you what I'm working on, you can say, well, I just did a search like that, Ryan, for XYZ company or ABC Medical. Here's who you need to talk to. They were the runner-up here, and they're still looking.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's the power of networking, right? I mean, there's, even outside of the Mullings Group, people that I'm connected with on LinkedIn, if I tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, I'm really trying to get in touch with Bill. I see he's the first connection of yours. Do you really know him? Would you be open to making a connect? I mean, at the very least, they'll say, hey, Dev, I really don't know him. Sorry, I can't help.
Right.
But I mean, you never know what that one connection is going to be able to do and introduce you to the person that you need to fill that role, or that could be a hiring manager that is looking for someone like you. And, hiring is the most important thing until it's not. They're focused on their PMA and they forget about the fact they need a regulatory specialist. You reach out to them and they go, oh, Ryan's from the Mullings Group. He's a headhunter. I actually do have something for him.
Right. And here's the other thing, and I talked to a client about this a couple of weeks ago. We'll do a post for a company we're building out. We may not be building out every aspect of that company, but we are doing a certain amount of roles. Well, my following, it's close to 16,000 followers now, is mostly commercial sales and marketing because that's my background.
Yeah.
So if I do a post, regardless of if it's commercial sales or marketing or not, my inbox is blowing up. are they hiring in this area? This is my geography. Will you send them my resume?
Yeah.
And so it's a blessing and a curse because we're trying to focus on staying narrow with our search, and then we're getting, maybe some people that are qualified, some people that aren't qualified. But I'll take that risk because people can't choose an option they don't know exists.
Yep.
It's our job to make sure that every candidate who we refer to as individuals is noticed by our clients if they're qualified. And that's why when you post a job, the LinkedIn algorithm does a good thing. It says Devin Stanley is looking for a electrical engineer, or Devin Stanley is looking for a COO. I can repost that to my network and say, hey, my colleague Devin's looking for this. And I'm sure you get calls because of that.
Yep.
Hey, Ryan shared that you're looking for this.
Yeah.
So that's how it works.
100%. 100%. What else are you looking for?
I'd like to know just a little bit more, Dev, on searches that you're working on now, so that you can share with our audience the types of different companies we're working with. So obviously you work in robotics a lot. You're working with a vascular company. You had me thinking. I know Adam Irving over at Levy Medical. They just had a fundraise. I think it was $4 million, something like that. And I was connected to him by Paul Tiska. I knew Paul from my time at CSI, and I actually managed Paul's son, Michael.
Yeah.
And I stay in touch with Paul quite a bit. He's well connected in the industry. He introduced me to Adam. But the reason I remembered that is they have a bioresorbable scaffold for prostatectomy. And so, again, legacy things like stents, scaffolds, drugs, they all kind of mesh into one and go into different disease states. So what other disease states and companies are you working with right now that our audience would probably be interested in?
Yeah, so we're doing a lot on the soft tissue robotic space. There's the companies that we work with are pretty well known out there just through Joe's network. Seeing the change in terms of the way these companies are trying to go to market versus historically going the IDN, the GPO route that has just been dominated by Intuitive. And, I talk to enough Intuitive reps, and so do you, both on the sales side, the clinical side, the regulatory side. And they let me know that, a vertical that they don't necessarily participate too much in for a variety of reasons is the ASC space. The footprint of the Da Vinci, the cost of the Da Vinci, the integration, I would say, the lack of integration that they provide at this point, because they're so far advanced from anyone else that they have their own everything, have their own stack, have their own video equipment, have their own everything. So an area that both on the soft tissue side and the orthopedic side that we're doing a lot of work with is focused specifically in those ASC networks. And providing those doctors with more capabilities from a technology perspective that isn't going to, give them a heart attack when they look at the price tag of it.
Because it's open source.
It's open source, and it's similar to other expenses that they may have made with video equipment, or if you've had an orthopedic robot like a Zimmer Rosa, and then you look at a soft tissue robot from any of these other platforms that's smaller in nature, the price point isn't drastically different. It's not 4 or 5x like an Intuitive would be.
And there's a software component to most of these.
Software component. There's plenty of companies that we're working with that are trying to incorporate the individual, the patient into this process. So think of a concierge doc. You go to a concierge doc and you have an application, and it tracks everything that you've ever done at that concierge, and it's all at your fingertips. And if you've never had one, and it's amazing. It's night and difference different in terms of going from a primary care physician, and you've probably dealt with this because you lived in Florida, and then you move back to Indiana. You have to get a new doctor, and they say, okay, well, you need to send us all your stuff. You have to call back the doctor in Florida, who maybe you only saw once. So then you have to go back 2 doctors before. Whereas if you have that type of setup, it's all right there at your fingertips.
Yeah, the concierge just sends it right to your new physician.
So there's a few companies we're working with that are tracking that patient journey through the ASC and through the surgical centers. And they're able to use that data to showcase to the patient the seamlessness of that procedure, what to be prepared for, what they need to eat, what they need to drink, what they can and can't do leading up to that procedure. So that patient says, wow, this is a pretty buttoned up operation, no pun intended, in terms of where I'm going.
Right.
And they're also collecting that data that they can then share back with the OEMs. So they're adding that level of value both to the patient from a patient experience, a patient journey perspective, as well as constantly sharing that data back with the OEMs, which is something that they're going to want as they're building up clinical cases, maybe to expand beyond the ASCs.
Which is where we need to go as a healthcare system. So you can watch, TikToks. I saw one show up on LinkedIn the other day of a girl that went to Turkey to get all her medical testing done. Of course, it looked like a 5-star resort, this hospital. There was somebody that met her at the door, and she got everything done from MRIs to eye scans, you name it, everything. $800.
Yep.
And she's in Turkey and gets to go on vacation. Medical tourism at its best. And then you have the opposite of that, which is, no, I can't email you that. I need to fax you that. I haven't had a fax machine since the 90s, right? We need to upgrade the way we do things. If you live in Israel, you have a QR code and it's a health passport. It's on your phone. You walk in, scan it, they have all your information.
Exactly.
But we've not quite gotten there in the United States, but there are companies, especially these startups, that are doing what you said, where they're having the personal health information, they're making it accessible, they're doing a consumer-first approach. And the more we personalize medicine and healthcare for people, I think the more we're going to see rapid adoption. And that doesn't matter if it's an aesthetics company, a regenerative medicine company, or the vascular company that you're talking about, right? So maybe there's some sort of test. I'm sure there's an imaging, right? That, hey, we put the bioresorbable scaffold in. It did its job. We're going to shoot an angiogram or some sort of scan and prove that, and then show that the stent is no longer there, or the scaffold is no longer there. So next thing you know, there'll be some sort of piece in there that talks to an app on your phone. Right?
Yeah. What about you? What clients or companies, technologies are you working with that you're starting to see as trendsetters in the market?
I mean, the neuro space to me right now is on fire. You've got Onward that's helping paralyzed people walk again. You've got Neuralink. Anything Elon Musk touches turns into gold. The guy's putting rockets up in the air and Starlink and all that. So I'd say anything in the neuro space that's attacking brain health, whether it's Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia. There's so many great companies out, too many to mention. But that, to me, is the next frontier. Cardiology is continuing to advance, and it's a big space because heart disease is such a big thing. But the brain is an area we still haven't conquered. So is it cheaper to fix it or to keep it healthy? And a lot of these technologies are focused on keeping you healthy. So maybe we'll talk more about neuro on the next R&D.
Cool. Ryan, that was great. Let's do it again another month.
It was fun. Let's do it.